Another buzzword that gets thrown around is leaky gut. What is that?
And why is my gut leaking?
Yeah.
Potentially.
So leaky gut is largely what we refer to in the scientific community that studies gastrointestinal health is we call this intestinal permeability. So basically the cells of our intestine are pretty tightly sealed and don't allow much to pass through their like spaces between them. So we have various different proteins that seal that gut barrier. And we also have different components that participate in the gut barrier. So we have like immune cells that help mediate that. We have that mucin layer, like I was talking about, that helps kind of seal it as well. And so leaky gut really just means intestinal permeability. And the term leaky gut has been latched onto by like functional medicine and things like that, because we are able in a experimental environment, so with mice, with cell culture, and to an extent with certain very tightly controlled human populations, we can assess intestinal permeability. And there were some earlier studies that showed that like a high-fat diet in mice increased intestinal permeability. And then we know individuals that have active inflammation or issues within their gut might have an increased intestinal permeability, which basically just means that that barrier is kind of breaking down a little bit and is not as tightly sealed. And so that was the issue that exists with that largely is our bacteria, when that's not sealed tightly, components of them can leach into circulation. And that's thought to cause inflammation throughout the body. So the most common one you'll see is called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide, also known as endotoxin. It's a component of gram-negative bacterial cell wall. It gets into circulation and it's pretty inflammatory. So for a lot of cell culture experiments that aren't even studying like gastrointestinal stuff, they will use LPS or endotoxin as like a positive control for an inflammatory mediator or inflammatory like insult, because it is just so inflammatory and causes so many issues. The issue with people terming it leaky gut is that we don't have any like clinical assessments to assess someone's intestinal permeability. There's nothing that's gold standard. And a lot of people they're basically telling everyone now that they have leaky gut, like these functional medicine like practitioners are telling everyone that they have leaky gut, and that the symptoms associated with leaky gut are fatigue and brain fog, and maybe you feel like bloated sometimes. And it's like, okay, well, everyone has dealt with those conditions at some
Yeah.
point. I hate when people use the term brain fog for and fatigue for like describing like conditions, especially related to the gut. Um, because they're so like subjective. Like,
Yeah. And like you said, like a lot of this stuff just comes down to it being a snapshot. Like you could have eaten like a huge meal, like, and you're getting a big like blood glucose response, and like you could just feel like crap.
yeah,
But it doesn't mean that like you
yeah,
have to label like the post meal feeling, oh, you must have leaky gut. It's a
yeah,
little irresponsible to do that.
yeah. They do that with SIBO too, which is why, well, it's the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. They tell everybody they have SIBO without doing the proper testing and measures to like assess it. Leaky gut is even more pervasive with like, I'm just going to tell you you have it and not going to do any tests to actually measure it, because there aren't any gold standard tests to measure it. So that's something. When people come to me and say, okay, I was told by this person that I have leaky gut, I'm like, okay, but let's like, what are we going to actually do with that information if like, let's say you have a leaky gut. Like, we know certain dietary practices that are just supportive of overall GI health. We're going to target those. We're not going to like, there's no specific cure, like just like there's no diagnosis for leaky gut, there's no identified cure for it. In like even animal models too. So we just have to focus on things that we know are more supportive for an intestinal environment. And that usually gets them to like, okay, well, you're having GI issues. You were told that it's leaky gut. Let's address the other GI issues because it's not leaky gut. We don't know that you have leaky gut. So yeah.
Could you have like a leaky gut experience just after one meal that goes away immediately after? Like,
There are studies that show that certain that our intestinal permeability can flux. There are certain and these are of course like cell culture and animal models, but after certain feeding, like certain high fat feedings, you can see a transient increase in intestinal permeability. Even after exercise, you can see an increase in intestinal permeability. Does that mean that exercise is bad and we shouldn't do it? And so it's not necessarily like black and white. Like we know exercise is beneficial. Just because you see like in a laboratory setting an increase in intestinal permeability doesn't mean that your intestine is leaky for forever. Our intestinal cells can turn over relatively quickly, and can repair themselves relatively quickly, which is good. They go through a lot of wear and tear with the digestive process. And so there's definitely a lot of transient effects that go on there as well, which kind of breaks down people's argument with leaky gut a little bit more.
yeah.